It started with a simple glance, harmless, fleeting, but enough to ignite a spark that I had buried deep inside for years. My husband and I had been married for over a decade, and while the love was there, the passion had slowly eroded under the weight of routines and unspoken frustrations. Then came the contractor, a man who disrupted the mundane with his confidence, charm, and piercing gaze that seemed to see right through me. He was hired to renovate our kitchen. That's all it was supposed to be. But every time he walked through the door, carrying tools and a rugged air of authority, I felt something stir within me. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was nothing more than harmless attraction. I told myself that everyone experiences these fleeting moments and they mean nothing. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The first time we spoke alone, it was innocent. My husband had left for work, and I stayed behind to oversee the project. The contractor, let's call him Daniel, was polite but distant at first. But as the days went by, our conversations grew longer. He'd ask about the books on my shelf, comment on the music I played while he worked, and compliment the coffee I made him. Each interaction was a brushstroke, painting a picture of something I couldn't ignore. One morning, as I handed him a mug of coffee, our fingers touched briefly. It was an electric moment, charged with unspoken tension. I pulled away quickly, laughing nervously, but the way he looked at me, a mix of curiosity and something deeper, left me breathless. It was as though he'd cracked open a door I'd kept locked for years. From that moment on, everything felt different. I started paying more attention to my appearance, choosing clothes that I knew accentuated my figure. I told myself it was for me, but I knew the truth. I caught his glances, the way his eyes lingered a little too long when he thought I wasn't looking. The air between us was thick with anticipation, a silent dance neither of us acknowledged but both felt. Then came the day it all unraveled. My husband had gone out of town for a business trip, leaving me alone to oversee the final stages of the renovation. Daniel arrived early, as usual, and I could feel the tension as soon as he stepped inside. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a line we both knew we were dangerously close to crossing. As the afternoon sun poured through the windows, casting golden light across the room, he asked if I could help him hold a cabinet in place while he secured it. It was an innocent request, but the proximity was intoxicating. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. When he turned to thank me, our faces were inches apart. "You're amazing," he said, his voice low and sincere. It was such a simple phrase, but it broke through the walls I had built around myself. Before I knew it, our lips met in a kiss that was both desperate and tender. It felt like a release, years of frustration and longing poured into a single moment. I knew it was wrong, but in that instant, I didn't care. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and shared secrets. Each time we were together, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. But with every high came the crushing weight of guilt. I loved my husband, and the betrayal gnawed at me like a persistent ache I couldn't ignore. Then it happened. The moment my world came crashing down. My husband came home early from his trip, a surprise he'd planned to catch me off guard. And he succeeded, though not in the way he'd intended. He walked into the house to find Daniel and me in an embrace that left no room for doubt. The look on his face will haunt me forever. Shock, anger, heartbreak, all rolled into one devastating expression. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked out the door. Daniel tried to apologize, but I couldn't even look at him. The reality of what I had done hit me like a tidal wave. That night, I sat alone in the dark, replaying everything in my mind. How had it come to this? How had I let a moment of weakness destroy the life we had built together? The next few days were agonizing. My husband refused to speak to me, and the silence was deafening. I wanted to explain, to apologize, to beg for his forgiveness, but I didn't know where to start. Eventually, he agreed to talk. It was the hardest conversation of my life. I confessed everything, holding nothing back. I told him about the loneliness I had felt, the way I'd lost myself in the monotony of our lives, and how Daniel had awakened something in me I thought was long gone. I didn't try to justify my actions because there was no justification. All I could do was tell the truth and hope he'd find it in his heart to forgive me. His response was not what I expected. He was angry, of course, but he also admitted that he'd felt the distance between us too. He said he'd been so focused on providing for us that he hadn't noticed how much we'd drifted apart. It didn't excuse what I had done, but it opened the door to a conversation we should have had years ago. Rebuilding our marriage has been the hardest thing I've ever done. The trust we had is gone, and I don't know if we'll ever get it back. But we're trying. We've started therapy, both individually and as a couple, and we're learning how to communicate in ways we never did before. It's a long road, and there are days when it feels impossible, but I'm committed to making it work. As for Daniel, I haven't seen him since that day. He's just a memory now, a reminder of how easily things can spiral out of control when you let your guard down. I don't blame him. This was my mistake, my choice, and I'm the one who has to live with the consequences. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's the importance of honesty. With yourself, with your partner, with the people you love. Secrets have a way of festering, growing into something much darker than you ever intended. If I had been honest about my feelings from the beginning, maybe none of this would have happened. I'm sharing my story not to seek sympathy or absolution, but to serve as a cautionary tale. Relationships are fragile, and it's so easy to take them for granted. If you're feeling disconnected from your partner, talk to them. Don't wait until it's too late, until the damage is done and you're left picking up the pieces of a life you barely recognize. My husband and I are still a work in progress. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm determined to fight for us, to rebuild what we lost and create something stronger. It won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is.